On today's episode of Geopolitics Digest, we summarize interviews episodes of some of my favorite and most informative and balanced experts in the geopolitics analysis space, starting with Alex Cristoforo of the Duran's summary of the news. So, in his monologue from the June 20th, he delves into a variety of geopolitical issues, offering his perspectives on the latest developments. Here is a detailed summary of his key points regarding EU sanctions on Russia. He begins by discussing the European Union's 14th sanctions package against Russia. He expresses skepticism about the effectiveness of these sanctions, noting that despite numerous rounds, the Russian economy not only remains resilient but is also showing signs of growth. He likens the EU efforts to the futile chase between the Roadrunner and the wily Coyote, suggesting that the EU strategies are as effective as the Coyote's Acme gadgets. Regarding Hezbollah's threat to Cyprus, he shifts to a more serious tone as he addresses the threats made by Hezbollah's leader Nasrallah towards Cyprus. Nasrallah warns that if Cyprus allows Israeli warplanes to use its airports during a potential conflict, Hezbollah will consider Cyprus a part of the war. Cristoforo clarifies that the threat is directed not at the Republic of Cyprus, but at the British overseas territories, which host air bases outside of the Cypriot government's control. He reports that the Cypriot government is working diplomatically to de-escalate the situation, seeking Iran's intervention to communicate with Hezbollah. He moves on to Putin's diplomatic moves. He comments that Russian President Vladimir Putin visits to North Korea and Vietnam, where he signed various strategic cooperation agreements. He criticizes the collective West's reaction to these visits, pointing out the hypocrisy in their outrage given the West's own actions in Ukraine. He suggests that the West's sanctions and proxy war have inadvertently pushed Russia to strengthen its alliances with other nations, including China, Iran, and North Korea. Regarding Ukrainian political dynamics, he touches on the internal politics situation there, where President Zelensky is reportedly banning opposition parties and seizing their assets. He interprets these actions as signs of panic within the Zelensky administration, possibly due to the lack of legitimacy following a failed peace summit. He also mentions rumors of the West's intention to replace Zelensky with a former Ukrainian army commander-in-chief, Zaluzhny, citing Russian intelligence sources, which could be just disinformation meant to troll Zelensky. Regarding energy infrastructure attacks in Ukraine, he reports on the missile and drone strikes targeting Ukrainian energy infrastructure, which have significantly reduced the country's electricity production. He notes the irony of the head of Ukraine's energy company being cut off during a media statement about the resilience of the energy system. Regarding the French political stance on Ukraine, he discusses the French political party National Rally's stance on the Ukraine conflict. He notes that while they oppose sending French troops, they support continuing aid to Ukraine, reflecting a broader trend in European support for the conflict. In conclusion, Cristoforo's monologue paints a picture of a complex and interconnected global political landscape where actions and reactions are intertwined and the consequences of political decisions reverberate across borders. His analysis suggests that the current strategies employed by the EU and the collective West may be counterproductive, leading to unintended alliances and escalations in global tensions. Next, let's look at 3 interviews done on the YouTube channel Dialogue Works, which is hosted by Dima. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but his first interview was with Dick Black, and it was a pretty enlightening interview, and where they delve into the intricate web of Ukrainian conflict, shedding light on the underlying motivations and the broader geopolitical implications that ripple far beyond the immediate theater of war. At the heart of the discussion lies the conflict in Ukraine, a tumultuous battleground where the aspirations of a nation clash with the strategic interests of global superpowers. Black posits that Russia's overtures for peace have been met with a cold shoulder from the West, particularly the United States and NATO, who appear more invested in the perpetuation of the conflict than in the pursuit of a diplomatic resolution. This stance, as Black suggests, is not born out of a commitment to democratic ideals, but rather the political and economic machinations of globalist oligarchs. Despite facing a barrage of Western sanctions aimed at crippling its economy and military capabilities, Russia has demonstrated a remarkable degree of resilience. The West's economic warfare has not only failed to bring Russia to its knees, but it has inadvertently showcased the nation's ability to withstand external pressures and maintain its sovereignty. The path to peace, as envisioned by Black, hinges on the decisive actions of a future U.S. president who possesses the fortitude to challenge the status quo. However, the interview acknowledges the formidable barriers that stand in the way, primarily the entrenched influence of oligarchic power that transcend national borders and wield significant sway over policy decisions. NATO's role in the conflict is characterized as increasingly tenuous, with its capabilities in Ukraine being overestimated and its political support within member countries waning. This perceived decline in NATO's efficacy raises questions about the alliance's future and its ability to fulfill its foundational objectives. A pivotal theme that emerges from the interview is the rising influence of the global south, which, in tandem with Russia's economic resilience, signals a potential realignment of global power structures. This development points to a future where the traditional centers of power may no longer dictate the course of international affairs, paving the way for a more multipolar world order. Black's critique extends to the broader pattern of foreign intervention and regime change spearheaded by the US and NATO. The repercussions of these actions have led to a loss of respect for the alliance and a growing skepticism about the efficacy of such interventions. In conclusion, the interview with Dick Black presents a sobering analysis of the Ukrainian conflict and the West's involvement. It calls for a reevaluation of current strategies and a sincere commitment to peace that transcends the narrow interests of the few. As the world stands at a crossroads, the choices made today will shape the geopolitical landscape for generations to come. The next interview Dima had was with Nikolai Petro. In this interview, Nikolai Petro, a renowned political analyst, provided a comprehensive overview of the geopolitical tension and diplomatic efforts surrounding the conflict in Ukraine. His insights shed light on the strategic maneuvers preceding the summit in Switzerland and the subsequent developments that have shaped the current state of affairs. Regarding the pre-summit maneuvers and the Swiss summit outcome, Petro began by discussing the preconditions set by Russia before the Swiss summit, which he interpreted as an attempt to influence the agenda and assert Russia's stance at a critical juncture. Despite the intention to demonstrate unity at the summit, Petro noted the lack of consensus, with approximately 15% of participants refraining from signing the final communique. This outcome, according to Petro, underscored the necessity of Russia's involvement in peace talks, a sentiment echoed in the diluted communique that called for dialogue among all parties. The interview delved into the specific preconditions proposed by Russia, particularly the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from certain regions and the abandonment of aspirations to join NATO. Petro highlighted the fluidity of these conditions, suggesting that they are subject to change over time. He emphasized the significance of the negotiations in Istanbul, viewing them as a positive step towards peace. Petro critiqued the Western response to Russia's preconditions, arguing that it portrays the West as obstructive to peace negotiations. He questioned the feasibility of a military victory of Russia, given Ukraine's disadvantages, and suggests that the West's insistence on victory complicates the pursuit of a diplomatic resolution. The interview touched upon the contradiction between the West's military strategy and its diplomatic goals. Petro argued that the West faces a dilemma. To achieve its stated objective, a victory, it would need to escalate military involvement, which contradicts its diplomatic stance. Petro also discussed Turkey's position within NATO, highlighting its reluctance to engage in operations against Russia. He pointed out the importance of Turkey's role in the alliance and its potential as an energy hub for Europe. The conversation concluded with an analysis of the economic repercussions of the conflict. Petro noted that the resilience of the Russian economy, despite sanctions and the challenges faced by European countries in securing energy supplies, he questioned the long-term viability of the West's strategy to isolate Russia economically and the impact of such policies on, on international law and order. Lastly, there was a shorter interview with Pepe Escobar, which I think was a part of a longer interview earlier in the week. In this candid interview, Pepe Escobar delves into the complexities of the geopolitical landscape, particularly focusing on the situation in Gaza and the broader implications for the multipolar world. Escobar poses a provocative question: how can the world progress towards multipolarity amidst ongoing genocide? This question remains unanswered by global powers, including the BRICS nations. Escobar critically examines the BRICS' stance on Gaza, acknowledging their well-intentioned statements but highlighting the lack of practical measures to end the violence. He argues that a military intervention is the only way to compel Israel to cease its actions. Yet this is an option that no one is willing to pursue due to the potential for a full-scale war with a nuclear-armed state. The interview reveals Israel's current state as a nuclear-armed entity, likened to ISIS with nuclear weapons, making it a formidable challenge to subdue. Escobar expresses disappointment in certain BRICS members who maintain relations with Israel, especially during times of conflict, which he views as a betrayal of moral principles. Escobar also touches upon the internal dynamics within BRICS, pointing out the divergent interests and actions of its members, which sometimes undermine the collective's goals. He praises Yemen's engagement against Israel and Hezbollah's preparedness for potential conflict, emphasizing the gravity of the situation and the difficulty in controlling a quote-unquote rabid dog. This discussion shifts to the United States' foreign policy, particularly its offer of a defense treaty to Saudi Arabia as a means to normalize relations with Israel and distance the kingdom from China. Escobar criticizes this as a classic quote-unquote divide and rule strategy, noting the Saudis' hesitance to outright reject American advances due to their ongoing process of aligning with the BRICS vision. Escobar concludes by contemplating the potential inclusion of Palestine as a BRICS member, a move he believes would send a powerful message to the world, and particularly to the Islamic world. While acknowledging the cautious approach of BRICS, he suggests that such a bold step would significantly alter the geopolitical landscape and bolster the multipolar world order. In essence, Pepe Escobar's insights shed light on the intricate web of international relations and the challenges faced by emerging multilateral organizations and shaping of the world that moves beyond unipolarity and towards a more balanced distribution of power. Next, let's move on to Judge Napolitano, Andrew Napolitano's podcast, Judging Freedom. And today he interviewed Scott Ritter, one of my favorite commentators on geopolitics. In this candid exchange with Judge Andrew Napolitano, Scott Ritter, a former UN's weapons inspector and military strategist, delves into the complexities of current geopolitical tensions and the elusive quest for peace. Ritter begins by dissecting President Putin's peace offer, characterizing it as a comprehensive declaration that, while not novel in its components, was necessary as an official policy statement. He interprets the timing of the offer as a strategic move to highlight the disingenuous nature of the so-called peace conference in Switzerland, which he labels as a, quote, war conference. Ritter posits that Putin's proposal, if accepted, would end the war immediately, but its rejection by the West was anticipated and serves to expose the West's lack of realistic engagement in the conflict. The conversation shifts to the internal pressures faced by President Putin, particularly from the Russian military. Ritter reveals that while there are options for a rapid conclusion to the war, Putin resists these due to the high human cost that they would entail. Instead, Ritter suggests that Putin is leveraging the war to strengthen Russia's political, industrial, and diplomatic standing, thus negating the need for a hasty resolution that would sacrifice Russian troops. A significant portion of the interview is dedicated to Putin's visit to North Korea, which Ritter describes as a game changer. He argues that this alliance fundamentally alters the geopolitical landscape, undermining the United States' pivot to the Pacific and challenging the continued isolation of North Korea. Ritter foresees North Korea emerging from economic darkness into the light of a robust partnership with Russia, which will have far-reaching implications for regional and global power dynamics. Um, Ritter offers a sobering analysis of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, emphasizing the ideological nature of Hamas and the futility of attempting to defeat such an ideology through military means. He critiques Israel's approach, suggesting that it only strengthens Hamas and pushes Israel further into a state of international isolation and existential crisis. In conclusion, Scott Ritter's insight paint a picture of a world where peace is as much a product of strategic calculation as it is of ideological commitment. His analysis underscores the importance of understanding the multifaceted nature of conflicts and the need for genuine efforts towards resolution that respect the realities and positions of all parties involved. He also interviewed Gilbert Doctorow, a renowned expert on Russian affairs, and provided insightful analysis into President Vladimir Putin's recent diplomatic moves. This discussion centered around two main topics: Putin's peace offering to Ukraine and his visit to North Korea. Dr. Doctorow challenges a Western consensus that Putin's peace offering was a demand for Ukrainian surrender before negotiations. Contrary to Jeffrey Sachs' interpretation, Doctorow posits that Putin's terms mirrored those demanded by Zelensky of Russia, essentially requiring a withdrawal of troops from contested territories as a precondition for talks. This move, Doctorow argues, was not a sign of weakness, but a calculated display of resolve aimed at both the Ukrainian side and Putin's domestic critics, who perceive him as overly cautious. The West's reaction to Putin's peace offering was seen as a misinterpretation of his intentions. Doctorow suggests that the Western view overlooked the strategic nature of Putin's demands, which were not just directed at Ukraine, but also at the 90 countries represented at the peace conference in Switzerland. By issuing what the Russians call a diplomatic torpedo, Putin aimed to disrupt the narrative and assert Russia's willingness to negotiate on its terms. Doctorow describes Putin's trip to North Korea as a game changer, as did Scott Ritter, that potentially saved the world from escalating tensions. By signing an agreement with North Korea, Putin effectively created a military alliance that could deter neoconservative forces within the U.S. administration from pursuing aggressive actions against Russia, thereby preventing a direct U.S.-Russian confrontation. In conclusion, Dr. Gilbert Doctorow's interview with Judge Napolitano sheds light on the complex geopolitical strategies employed by President Putin. By presenting a tough stance through his peace offering and forging an alliance with North Korea, Putin has demonstrated a commitment to protecting Russia's interest while simultaneously challenging Western perceptions of Russia's diplomatic posture. He also interviewed Judge Napolitan, also interviewed Tony Schaefer. And in this kind of interview with Judge Napolitano, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer offered his insights into the intricate web of global politics, with a particular focus on President Putin's strategies on the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Schaefer's analysis, rooted in historical parallels and deep understanding of geopolitical dynamics, provides a thought-provoking perspective on the current state of international relations. Schaefer begins by discussing Putin's proposed peace plan, which he believes was a sincere attempt to negotiate to end an end to military operations in Ukraine. Drawing controversial comparisons, Schaefer suggests that Putin is mirroring the tactics used by the United States during the Cold War, specifically likening him to President Reagan. This analogy is bound to stir debate as it challenges the prevailing narrative of Putin's actions. Schaefer argues that Putin's offer to negotiate, despite its rejection by the West, was a strategic move reminiscent of Reagan's approach to the Soviet Union. The interview delves into Putin's strengthening ties with allies, particularly North Korea, and the formalization of their cooperation. Schaefer highlights the significance of Russia's involvement in North Korea's nuclear program and the strategic implications of their partnership. Furthermore, he discusses Putin's response to being excluded from the SWIFT banking system, noting his effort to establish alternative economic systems and alliances such as BRICS to challenge the G7's dominance. The critical point raised by Schaefer regarding the Saudi-Russia alliance and the dollar's dominance is a collaboration between Russia and Saudi Arabia to potentially remove the dollar as the fiat currency for global energy transactions. This move, largely unreported in the Western media, could have profound implications for the global economy and the United States' financial hegemony. Regarding Ukraine's political quagmire and the path to peace, Schaefer expresses skepticism about West's commitment to peace, criticizing the summary dismissal of Putin's peace plan and the lack of genuine negotiation efforts. He questions the leadership of President Zelensky and the West's strategy, suggesting that their actions are leading to the unnecessary loss of Ukrainian lives without a clear path to victory. The interview touches on China's ambitions and its role in the shifting global power dynamics. Schaefer notes China's long term objectives and its desire to redefine the world order, emphasizing the need for careful negotiations over antagonism. Tony Schaefer's analysis, as presented in the interview, calls for a realistic assessment of the geopolitical landscape and a return to diplomatic engagement. His historical comparisons and insights into the motivations of global actors serve as a reminder that the complexities of international relations require nuanced understanding of strategic thinking. The judge also interviewed Max Blumenthal today, and in this candid exchange with the judge, Max delves into the complexities of international relations, focusing on the recent developments in Israel, the West's stance on Russia's peace proposal, and the intricate dynamics of the Ukrainian conflict. Blumenthal expresses his lack of surprise at the West's swift dismissal of President Putin's peace offering, a gesture that was undermined almost immediately. He criticizes the West, particularly former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, for sabotaging a potential peace deal in April of 2022, which could have prevented the ongoing devastation in Ukraine. The West's reluctance to see Ukraine revert to a neutral state, coupled with the financial interests of arms manufacturers, has prolonged a war that has left Ukraine in ruins. The conversation shifts to the Israeli political landscape, where Prime Minister Netanyahu's public disagreement with the IDF over the approach to Hamas is highlighted. Blumenthal points out that the IDF recognizes the futility of defeating Hamas, an entity deeply rooted in the ideology of resistance. This acknowledgement by the IDF contradicts Netanyahu's aggressive stance, which seeks a conclusive victory over Hamas. Blumenthal also touches upon the internal strife within Israel, exacerbated by Netanyahu's judicial overhaul attempts, leading to widespread protests and potential destabilization of Israeli politics. The military's influence and credibility in Israel are contrasted with the political's leadership, revealing a deep-seated tension that threatens the nation's stability. The interview further explores the economic repercussions of the conflict in Israeli society, with Blumenthal noting the significant withdrawal of foreign investment, particularly in the tech sector, and the strategic implications of Israel's reliance on coal imports. In conclusion, Blumenthal's discussion with Napolitano sheds light on the intricate web of geopolitical and ideological conflicts that shape our world today. The interview underscores the urgent need for diplomatic solutions and the dire consequences of prolonged conflicts on nations and their people. That's it for Judge Napolitano's. The other podcast that I like to listen to is the New Atlas, which is hosted by Brian Berletic. And his episode for today and his post for today, he investigated. He did an investigative report, which he titled "Behind the Myth of Billions in Arms Flowing into Ukraine." He critically examines the Western media's portrayal of American military aid to Ukraine. He challenges the narrative that the influx of weapons will significantly alter the conflict's dynamics, suggesting instead that the quantities are too small to have purported impact. The report opens by addressing the optimistic prognosis presented by Western media, particularly a Bloomberg article, which suggests that American weaponry will help Ukraine turn the tide of the conflict. Berletic questions the effectiveness of the Pentagon's assistance package, noting the absence of specific quantities for the listed weapons and ammunition. Berletic scrutinizes the recent Pentagon's assistance package for Ukraine, highlighting the lack of specific quantities for the weapons and ammunition listed. He suggested that the U.S. is running short of these systems and the actual amount being sent are insufficient to match the expectations set by Western media. The report delves into the production numbers of the Javelin anti-tank missiles and the Swedish-made NLAW. Berletic reveals that Lockheed Martin has only increased Javelin production by 15%, resulting in 2,400 missiles per year. This figure pales in comparison to Russian military production capabilities. Berletic highlights the significant gap in artillery shell production between Russia and the West. He cites a Business Insider article that estimates Russia's production at 4.5 million shells per year, while the US and Europe combined only amount to 1.3 million, placing Ukraine at a strategic disadvantage. The report criticizes the Western approach to measuring success in the conflict, which focuses on territorial gains rather than attrition. Berletic suggests that Russia's strategy of opening new fronts stretches Ukraine's limited resources thinner, creating a strategic dilemma for Kiev. In conclusion, Berletic's report paints a grim picture of the Western military assistance to Ukraine. He contends that the billions in arms flowing into the country are unlikely to change the tide of the conflict. Instead, they ensure continued Ukrainian casualties, territorial losses, and refugee flows, leading to a disadvantageous peace for Ukraine. Berletic implies that the true objective of U.S. policy is not to help Ukraine win, but to prolong the conflict, thereby increasing the cost for Russia in a proxy war that ultimately damages Ukraine's prospects for the future. Berletic's analysis calls for a closer examination of the realities on the ground versus the optimistic projections presented by Western media. His report serves as a sobering reminder of the complexities and harsh truths of military conflicts and the often overlooked consequences of international aid. Also want to go to a almost, I think, over a 2-hour long interview by Tucker Carlson with Neil Oliver. So in this profound exchange between Tucker Carlson and Neil Oliver, the dog traverses the complex landscape of modern socio-political dynamics, revealing a deep-seated concern for the erosion of individual liberties and the encroachment of centralized power. The conversation, rich with the historical references and contemporary analysis, delves into the heart of what it means to be human in an increasingly controlled and manipulated society. Oliver begins by addressing the difficulty of distinguishing between regimes and populations, highlighting the problematic nature of generalizing and judging entire groups based on the actions of their leaders. This sentiment resonates deeply in a world where the line between the individual and the collective is often blurred by sweeping narratives. His disillusionment with the establishment and institutions he once trusted, particularly in light of the COVID pandemic and its aftermath, speaks to a broader sense of betrayal felt by many who have seen their foundational beliefs shaken. Central to the discussion is the theme of maintaining freedom of speech in the face of government overreach. Oliver's past affiliations with the BBC and other organizations serve as a backdrop to his current stance on the importance of individual thought and the right to dissent. The conversation underscores the challenges of speaking out against mainstream narratives and the labels often used to discredit dissenters. The speakers advocate for honesty and the pursuit of truth amidst widespread deception, emphasizing the need for vigilance and resistance to protect democratic values. The dialogue touches on the concept of democracy and the impact of mass immigration on national identity, suggesting a societal regression towards a feudal-like state where a small elite holds power over the majority. The speaker expressed concern over the manipulation of populations by unseen powers, a theme that echoes historical patterns of totalitarianism and the shift in Western society post-World War II. The role of faith in the fight between good and evil emerges as a pivotal element in the conversation, with Oliver and Carlson discussing the theological implications of altering the human form and the anti-human agenda driven by transhumanist ideologies. The discussion extends to the historical context of the Bank of England, the concept of a debt-free currency, and the skepticism around the handling of the COVID pandemic. The interview also sheds light on concerns about declining human populations and societal shifts in priorities away from family and children. The speaker criticized the hypocrisy of the wealthy in addressing climate change, the exploitation involved in green energy production, and the potential for famine due to changes in farming practices. In conclusion, the Carlson Oliver dialogue is a call to action for those who value freedom, democracy, and individual rights. It is a reminder of the importance of understanding what it means to be human and alive, and the necessity of optimism and hope in the face of challenges to these fundamental principles. The conversation is a testament to the enduring spirit of inquiry and the unyielding pursuit of truth in an age where such quests are increasingly vital. The last thing that I wanted to, there's two more articles that I wanted to touch on. One of them is the kind of a debate between Piers Morgan and Jeffrey Sachs that I watched yesterday, actually. And so I've seen two. This is my third debate that I've seen between the two of them, and I actually think it's a pretty good setup because in a lot of the commentaries that I see online, some of my favorite ones, it seems like they're all in agreement with everything that each other is saying. So there's hardly ever any pushback. And so this is kind of a different format where there is a bit more of a adversarial component to it, where they're trying to debate, and so there is some pushback to even some of the views that I would agree with. But in this debate, Sachs argues that Russia views NATO's expansion as an existential threat, not just a political issue. He suggests that the United States and Europe need to understand this perspective to prevent escalating tensions. But Morgan counters this by pointing out that NATO's expansion has not yet reached Ukraine, and that Putin's reactions are preemptive. He questions whether Russia's fears are justified or if they're being used as a pretext for aggression. Next, they discuss the crisis in Ukraine. Sachs suggests that the territorial issues could be negotiable, but the non-negotiable parts are NATO's enlargement to Ukraine and the Crimea's status. Morgan challenges this by stating that Putin's terms for peace negotiations involve Ukraine ceding control of certain territories, which is unacceptable, according to him. He also questions whether Sachs is being too lenient on Russia's annexation of Crimea. Moving on, Sachs criticizes the United States for its history of covert regime changes and wars of choice. He suggests that these actions have contributed to the current tensions with Russia. Morgan questions why Sachs is not as critical of Putin's actions in Ukraine, which mirror the actions Sachs criticizes the U.S. for. He also points out that while the U.S. has made mistakes, it has also played a crucial role in maintaining global stability. Finally, Sachs emphasizes the need for open negotiations between the United States and Russia. He argues that both sides need to clearly state their terms and negotiate in good faith. Morgan, however, expresses skepticism about Putin's sincerity in negotiations given his actions in Ukraine. He suggests that trust is earned through actions, not just words, and that Russia's actions have not been conducive to building trust. In conclusion, this interview provides a deep dive into some of the most pressing issues of international politics today. Sachs offers a perspective that challenges the conventional narratives and invites us to think critically about these issues. Morgan, on the other hand, provides a counterpoint that questions some of Sachs' assumptions and pushes for a more critical view of Russia's actions. As always, I encourage you to do your own research and form your own opinions. And the last interview that I'd like to highlight is one that was done by Glenn Greenwald and the French person Arnaud Bertrand. I don't know who that is, but it was a thought-provoking interview. In the ever-evolving landscape of French politics, the interview between Arnaud Bertrand and Glenn Greenwald emerges as a beacon of insight, shedding light on the tumultuous shifts within the nation's political arena. Bertrand, an entrepreneur and political analyst with a profound understanding of geopolitics and economics, delves into the intricacies of France's political upheaval following the EU elections. The crux of the discussion revolves around President Macron's audacious decision to dissolve the French parliament and instigate snap elections, a move perceived as a high-stakes gamble to sow discord within the political system and reestablish himself as a harbinger of stability. However, this calculated risk appears to unravel as the left swiftly consolidates into the Popular Front, and Marine Le Pen's far-right party gains unprecedented traction. Bertrand brings to the fore the ascension of Jordan Bardella, a young and charismatic figure within Le Pen's party, whose soft-spoken yet persuasive advocacy positions him as a potential prime ministerial candidate. Despite leading the polls, Bertrand cast doubt on the far right party's ability to secure a parliamentary majority, hinting at a possible cohabitation scenario with Macron retaining the presidency. The analysis extends beyond the surface level political machinations, probing into the underlying currents of discontent that propel the electorate towards the fringes of the political spectrum. It is a narrative of disillusionment with the status quo, where centrist parties falter and extreme ideologies find fertile ground. Bertrand's insight reveal a populace weary of the establishment's failure to arrest the nation's decline, seeking solace in the promises of populist movements. Macron's strategic maneuvering, while emblematic of a seasoned politician, seems to underestimate the organizational prowess and allure of these movements. The potential for a cohabitation government underscores the fragmented nature of French politics and the challenges of forming stable governing coalitions. In essence, the interview with Bertrand offers a comprehensive examination of the current political shifts in France and underscores the complexities of navigating the rise of populism within a democratic framework and the broader implications of anti-establishment sentiments that resonate across the globe. As France stands at a crossroads, the dialogue between Bertrand and Greenwald serves as a testament to the transformative power of political discourse in shaping the future of the nations. And so, those I know that I probably missed several equally important and informative podcasts or interviews that came out today. Those are the ones that I had time to get around to listening to. And I hope this was helpful to you. This is not meant to take the place of actually watching those interviews. I highly encourage you to go and listen to those interviews in their entirety, because they have a lot of details, obviously, that I wasn't able to talk about. But this is hopefully gives you a summary of some of the main points that some of these thinkers are thinking about and they're sharing. And I think it's important for us to be able to balance what we're hearing from mainstream media with some of these voices that are not present. Sometimes they are excluded from those platforms. So anyways, hope you liked it, and I'll see you in the next episode.